Welcome to the Power of One. Today we're going to be speaking about a very important issue, human trafficking. Human trafficking takes place all around the world. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Prevention Month. It is extremely, extremely important that we educate each other so no one becomes a victim of human trafficking. We're going to be speaking with Becky from South Dakota. Welcome to the show, Becky. Becky, please tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me about Call to Freedom and when it became an official agency and where Call to Freedom is located.
Absolutely. So Call to Freedom was founded we submitted for our 501c3 in late 2015 and opened our doors in January of 2016. And we were located here in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, but we're an anti-human trafficking agency that provides services to pretty much Midwestern and even across the United States, because there are very limited anti-human trafficking groups and many in the United States as a whole. So Call to Freedom was formed, and I'm Becky Rasmussen, and I founded Call to Freedom, and it was formed really to offer supportive services to those that have been victimized by either sex or labor trafficking. And as we began offering services and learning the journey and the story of those that we were serving, we realized that we really had to diversify our services to meet the complex needs of a trafficking survivor. And as we also started just primarily serving adults, we started to realize, as we learned the survivor stories, that they were victimized not as adults, but as youth, and have gotten lost in our system. And it was only put in federal statute in early 2000. And so most people didn't talk about human trafficking. And so as we started navigating life with them, that's how Call to Freedom was developed. Call to Freedom was developed by survivors and the needs of survivors. So we went from being simply volunteers to fast forward to today, where we have 27 staff, 24 full-time, 3 part-time staff. We have housing where we house called Marissa's House, and we house survivors and their children. And we also serve on the prevention side, the education side, and then also providing services to adults and men who are in labor trafficking situations.
What gave you the drive to create Call for Freedom? Did that happen when you were volunteering and you fell in love? Because that's actually what happened to me as far as the victim services world. My mother started out with Northwest Victim Services in the 80s. She started out as a volunteer, sat on the board, became the board president, and then the executive director. So I started in victim services in high school, helping my mother with fundraising. And then my mom retired in 2012, and I sat on the board at Northwest Victim Services. And I absolutely fell in love with helping others. Is that what happened to you?
You know, I say this is a call. Never did I wake up one day and say I was going to be doing what I'm doing today, but I knew in my heart I was called to something greater. Had met a woman probably, 16 years ago, who really started the work in South Dakota. Her name was Susan Omenson. She had an organization called Be Free Ministries. She was telling about her work in South Dakota, and something inside of me stirred, like, this is what you're going to do. Didn't know what it looked like. The timing was wrong until we came to 2015. And I was in prayer and I felt something say, get involved again. And so I Googled what everybody does. They Google anti-human trafficking in South Dakota. And I ended up at a luncheon for the former Be Free Ministry and started serving. I ended up on the board, ended up going to Sturgis, South Dakota in August of 2015. That forever changed my life. We were doing outreach, and I had met a young girl at the Sturgis rally that was very vulnerable. And in her story, I knew something was off. She looked like she could be what we call in the life, for lack of better words. And I connected with her for about 10 minutes. And at the end of that 10 minutes, she was very fearful, didn't say a lot. And her last words were to me, "You have no idea what kind of day I've had." You have no idea. Little did I find out through other organizations that she was actually missing. She was one of the missing kids that was being searched for at Sturgis Rally. She was in a book of 117 girls aged 12 to 18. And I found out that she was actually had been found in the missing and then went missing again. And I began asking the questions, how does somebody like Marissa end up missing? How do we lose these kids? And they began to tell me that there were only at that time 298 beds in the United States for victims of human trafficking. That this is the second largest criminal activity, and it's a $150 billion industry and 40 million people in slavery today. And long story short, the Lord just started downloading a vision, and I founded Call to Freedom in November of 2015, applied for 501c3, got accepted January of 2016, and that began the journey of Call to Freedom. And so for me, this is a call. I believe God, some reason, and for whatever that may be, handpicked me to lead this charge here in South Dakota. It has been a privilege to serve survivors. It has been a privilege to walk alongside them, and we need to get the word out. 3% of victims are ever identified. That means that they stay in those situations or they never receive services or help. And so breaking the silence, I want to thank you for having us, is very key into identifying human trafficking victims.
Becky, tell the viewers what human trafficking is.
Yes, human trafficking is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to exploit somebody for either labor or sex. And so there has to be an exchange of money in that transition in order for it to qualify. Unless most states have taken force, fraud, or coercion out of their state statute if you're under the age of 18. So in most states, on a state level, you do not have to prove force, fraud, or coercion if you are under the age of 18. You just have to prove the intent to traffic. But there has to be that exchange of financial that they don't receive back for it in order to qualify for human trafficking.
And human trafficking is just not limited to sex exploitation, correct?
Correct. You know, we're talking about labor trafficking, which I think we'll touch on more in another segment, but labor trafficking is domestic servitude. We see here in our region a lot in that foreign national population when individuals that are coming from Guatemala, different countries, promise of a better job. They get here on a temporary visa and it is not what they expected, nor is it what they were promised. And we're navigating a lot of that foreign national population. We have controversy around the border where there's a lot of illegal immigrants coming across the border for purpose of safety. And, you know, we support them. However, it makes them very vulnerable as well. They need a job. They'll go to the places that don't ask for identification, that make it sound like a good job. And thus creates that labor trafficking piece as well. We've also seen that in massage parlors. There's lots of different ways that this can be facilitated. You'll hear from one of our survivors who actually, her name was used in LLCs, and she was forced to carry loads across the borders that had illegal drugs in them. So there's lots of different ways that labor trafficking is also within our population. It is probably the least talked about form of human trafficking, but probably very prevalent. We just don't know it because we don't talk about it, nor do a lot of entities know how to handle those cases once they come forward, because there's just so many complex connections to that as far as immigration, as far as visas, that most people don't feel equipped to be able to navigate those cases.
When you're human trafficked, or when someone is human trafficked, they can be transported from state to state. Is their trafficker like traveling with them, or do they send someone with them to make sure that they don't escape?
So our experience has been that what we call that transit trafficking, where they take where the demand is, right? So wherever there is a demand that they're able to sell these individuals to make money, they're going to take that commodity, which is that human being, to that particular destination. So here in the Midwest, we have what's called a Midwest pipeline. And that Midwest pipeline actually runs from South Dakota to North Dakota, Wisconsin, Minnesota to Nebraska. And so when you have 90 and 29 going through communities, they're coming through our rural communities to a different destination. And so traffickers will follow with them. What we have seen too is that sometimes they're so good at what they do, and that the traffickers are, that they create so much fear in these victims that sometimes they don't even have to be present. Sometimes they're holding their child. Sometimes they have a threat behind the scenes that we're not aware of. And they don't necessarily have to travel, but that victim will still go to that destination and perform those acts. And so that control comes in so many more facets than we even know. And sometimes it's just the idea behind the scenes that I'm going to kill your son or daughter if you don't go do this work. So yes, typically they do travel with them really in those initial stages, but as they are more ingrained into that life, those threats continue to have them show up to do this work because of the fear behind it.
Yeah, they have those mental chains wrapped around their mind, and that's very, very powerful. Children who are human trafficked, that looks different from adults who are human trafficked. And I remember attending a training, and like you said, they could travel somewhere and then come back. So it's not like someone who is locked in a room 24 hours a day and 7 days a week. You can still be human trafficked and live in your house. Think about those children who are human trafficked, but they return home every day. Tell the viewers, what would some warning signs be if children are being human trafficked, and what a parent or guardian can do?
So typically what we see here in South Dakota, we have 8 reservations. Poverty level is called familial trafficking. So familial trafficking is somebody who's trafficked by their mother, father, aunt, or uncle. That's really hard to identify because those young kids are typically groomed by the person they trust the most, introduced to that life. So essentially what we're running into is most victims don't even know they're victims of human trafficking because they're introduced to this life by somebody they trust. So knowing that is really important because they're not going to self-identify in those situations because they don't understand what's happening to them. Most of them have grown up in this, introduced to pornography and to drugs. So when you run into somebody or you are identifying, it's usually those controlled pieces. They don't have the ability to speak freely to you. They may be fearful. They may not make eye contact with you. They're typically not in control of their identification or things in their life because the trafficker controls every element of that. And a lot of times, again, they're not going to know they're a victim of human trafficking. So they're not going to come out and say to you, I'm being trafficked. They know something's wrong. They know what's happening to them is probably not right. But most of the survivors we have worked with have not self-identified until later in life because they don't understand what's happening to them. And so I think something to be really careful of when you're navigating and reporting these cases as mandatory reporters is sometimes that victimization and statute is a guardian. So we see them coming where they're taking guardianship of kids and saying they're the guardians, and they're really not. They're operating in that particular facet in this person's life, and they're actually the trafficker. So it's really having that ability to separate kids to be able in a safe place. They may not disclose right away, but being able to ask the questions to what safety looks like, because I think sometimes Our systems are still new to this, and so they don't understand how to safely navigate those scenarios with kids especially. And then we put them back into that household where that victimization is happening. So Department of Homeland Security has a great warning signs, and we work pretty closely with DHS.
Becky, let's talk about teens. When you're a teen, your emotions are all over the place. You can meet an older guy that you think you're in love with, and this older guy can groom you, or female, like you said. They build that trust, and then they have you do things that you know is not the norm, and you know it's not right, but the teen has already fell in love with this person, started to trust this person, and then this person causes them again to do things that they know are not right, but before they know it, they're knee deep in it. Mm-hmm. Speak about those teens who experience human trafficking, and do you see that in South Dakota that there are teens that actually come out of it, or they identify with, no, this is my boyfriend. He's not hurting me. He just wants me to do these things, and they keep doing them.
Yeah. We're seeing lots of ways this is facilitated, but typically it's that coercion piece, right? And because it's harder to prove. If you have a willing victim, if you have somebody that says, I went to this person or I ran away to meet this person, then it's much harder to prove. So a lot of traffickers are business people. They are master manipulators. They are online 8 hours plus a day looking for kids that they can victimize. And what they do is they look at profiles. They look at maybe scenarios of vulnerability within their life. My parents got divorced. I feel alone. Boom, target. They begin a conversation. They talk about, draw them close to them. Your parents don't understand you, but I do. I have experienced this. I'll love you like nobody else will. And they will get them so attached to themselves and say all these lies to be that perfect person that these victims truly feel like this person loves them. They wouldn't harm them. And I've even had law enforcement say to me, it's easier to prove when I have physical bruises. But that manipulation piece and that mind game piece creates a trauma bond that's very difficult to break, especially with our youth. And kids don't have the ability to discern or to be able to talk through what's happening to them or recognize. And traffickers know that. They know that this person is vulnerable. Emotionally, this is what's missing. I'm going to be what that person is missing emotionally, and I'm going to fill that void so they belong somewhere, because everybody wants to belong. Once they get that victim to belong with them, they begin to isolate them, control them, and sometimes we don't see them again. And we filled calls all over the United States, from Florida, Michigan, and parents going, I think this is happening to my child. How do I stop it? How do I stop this process from happening? Because you feel so out of control as a parent because they're so good at what they do. And there's a lot of information on our website. We actually have a parent connection class at calltofreedom.org. You can tune into that, sign up, and there are a 3-part training series on everything we're talking about to equip parents to be able to successfully navigate those situations, identify, successfully navigate, and then protect their children from that in the future.
And Becky, it's amazing, and you touched on it before, that a human trafficker does not have to look like a human trafficker. You would never know that a mother, a father, an aunt, uncle, a friend, or someone who looks just like you and I could be someone who can actually human traffic someone. So that's mind-boggling also. Becky, is there a national number for someone who is being human trafficked and they want help?
Yeah, sure. There is, I would say, a really good resource. And the reason why I say this resource is the Department of Homeland Security. Like you said earlier, most of these cases are bi-state cases, so they cross state lines. Jurisdiction issues, traffickers know jurisdiction issues within that legal realm as well. And so they're masters at not only manipulating people, but our systems. And so I always say Department of Homeland Security is typically that by state, they can cross those state lines, they have more jurisdiction, and a lot of them have been trained and received more training than some of the local entities to be able to combat these cases. So the number for that is 1-888-373-7888. Now, if it's an emergency, I would always say call 911 for your local response. If it's something that is not an emergency, then I think that's a really good number to start navigating those cases.
Becky, tell me about housing for someone who calls and they say, listen, I'm being human trafficked and I need to get out of this situation immediately. In South Dakota, is there an agency that would say, listen, we will put you up in a hotel until we're able to relocate you? In the city of Philadelphia, we have amazing agencies, but I will say relocation is an issue. Relocation is an issue for a victim that comes forth and that needs to go into a hotel immediately, that needs to go into a shelter immediately. 9 times out of 10, the shelters are full. You can't ask someone in danger, well, let me call you back tomorrow and see if I can help you. Or let me call you back in 2 days to see if I can help you. That doesn't work. Tell me how it works in South Dakota when someone needs to relocate immediately.
Yeah. So first thing we assess, 2 things we assess when somebody walks through the door, because this is the way that traffickers control them. One is safety, other is basic needs. Those 2 have to be met before you can actually get to the next phases with any victim of human trafficking. If they don't feel safe, they're not going to stay with you. They will run and they will go into survival mode. If their basic needs aren't met, they're actually going to come back to their trafficker, because that's how the trafficker controls them. Hygiene projects, housing, those type of things. So this is an essential part for those that are providing services to get those basic needs met. Now, housing is one of those, right? If I don't feel safe, the first thing I have learned in this, we don't know what safety is for that victim. We have to ask the questions. We can perceive that we've given them housing and they still don't feel safe. So one of the intake processes that we do is we say, all right, tell us what safety looks like to you. Or would you feel safe staying in Sioux Falls, South Dakota? If they say no, say, all right, so let's talk about where we can get you safe, where you know that you can have safety. And we've done where we've actually gotten a car with our security team and taken them 9 states away. We worked with another program. So here's what I tell you, safety is key, and it's not just always a hotel because
Right.
sometimes they're being tracked in their car by their phone. So helping identify why they're not feeling safe is very key. He's tracking me by my phone. He put a tracker on my car. Let's check your car. Let's check your phone. Let's get rid of your SIM card. Let's get you a new phone. Once you navigate not only location safety, but some of those other issues that are making them feel unsafe, their body can settle, their mind can move forward, and then we can talk about next steps. So housing for us in those emergency services, we stayed away from hotels because a lot of their victimization has been in hotels. We actually have gotten creative where we have an emergency apartment that we lease and we keep for 365 days a year.
Okay.
That is locked down and safe, that we provide. Sometimes domestic violence shelters are the best. And I would say if you are a service provider, get to know your domestic shelters, make a relationship with them. We have a great relationship with them, even if they are packed. We will call and we'll say, we got somebody, they will fit us in. And so that really is about collaboration and relationships for anti-human trafficking groups. And then sometimes it's not in Sioux Falls, maybe it's in Pierre, maybe it's in Rapid, wherever they feel safe. We've developed those relationships across the state of South Dakota, in other states. so that when we have that really unique situation, we have the ability to partner with a lot of different people to provide that need.
Becky, please give the viewers that number one more time if someone is being human trafficked, and they need help.
Yeah, that is 1-888-373-7888. If it's an emergency, please hang up and call 911, and the local law enforcement will be in there. But and I would also say to the community, if something doesn't seem right, your gut is usually right. It's your job to report unusual activity, and it's our job of our local law enforcement to follow up on it. But if you're seeing something where we're talking about a lot of people coming in and out, where something doesn't feel right, you're watching young kids come in and out, women coming in and out, boys coming in and out, make sure to report that to your local PD, so that they can follow up and hopefully intervene in some of these cases.
Thank you so much, Becky. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to educate us. And I thank you so much that you answered the call to help those who are in need. Thank you so much for joining me today.
And thank you for having us and giving this a voice. We greatly appreciate it, Melany.
Thank you so much for joining me. Please, please be aware of the signs of human trafficking. You may be the one to save someone's life. Remember, the power of one starts with you. Peace and blessings.